Good evening, everyone. I'm Abha Mishra, a faculty at Indian Institute of Science and a member of IIT-ACB. I welcome you all for today's webinar by Professor Rohini Godbole, who is a world-renowned theoretical particle physicist and an advocate for equity in STM. Over the past 3 decades, Professor Godbole was involved in the work related to the research of Higgs particle. She is well known for her work on measuring properties of Higgs and top particles, as well as particle and supersymmetry theory. Her research on interaction of high energy colliders, which had a great impact on the design of high energy electron-positron colliders. Professor Godbole's research was published in about 300 research papers, and she wrote several textbooks on particle physics. I should also mention here that Professor Godbole has co-edited a book, Leelavati's Daughter, published by Indian Academy of Sciences in 2008. So Professor Godbole was part of several international committees and national committees. A few I'm going to just mention here are, she was a member of International Detector Advisory Group for the International Linear Collider, and she's currently a member of the Circular Electron-Positron Collider being planned in China. She's a member of High Energy Physics Advisory Panel in USA, and in the past, she was also a member of Scientific Advisory Committee to the Cabinet. So Godbole is recipient of many national and international awards, besides being the fellow of all the 3 premier science academies in India, as well as the World Academy of Sciences. She also received Satyendra Bose Medal for Theoretical Physics of the Indian National Science Academy, Meghna Saha Medal for Theoretical Physics of the Asiatic Society, G.C. Bose Fellowship of the Department of Science and Technology in India. Moreover, she has been a visiting professor at various international universities. Her recent appointment is Wonderwal's Chair Visiting Professor at the University of Amsterdam. In 1929, Professor Rohini Godbole's work was awarded a Padma Shri, a highest civilian honors of India in the field of science and engineering, nuclear, for her impactful contributions. Currently, she is an honorary professor at the Center of High Energy Physics in IISc after her superannuation. Her achievements are countless, and I can just keep on going, counting on those. Thank you, Professor Godbole, to be part of the seminar series. We are really grateful to have you here today for your talk. So now let me introduce Professor Urjit A. Yajnik, who will be moderating today's talk. So Professor Yajnik gained his integrated master's degree in physics from IIT Bombay in 1980, and then he received his PhD degree in elementary particle physics from University of Texas, Austin. He has been a faculty member at IIT Bombay since 1989, and he was the founding Dean of Academic Programs and Student Affairs at IIT Gandhinagar. So Professor Yajnik's research is focused on unified theories, supersymmetry, general relativity, and cosmology. So thank you, Professor Yajnik, to be part of this webinar. In this webinar, we have 2 more panelists, Dr. Sushila Venkatraman and Mr. Ashok Kamath, members of IIT-ACB. So before I hand over to Professor Rohini Godbole for her talk, there is an important announcement for the audience. So please write your questions in QA box only, since we will not be monitoring the chat box. So we may miss your questions if you write any questions in chat box. So please use the chat box only for if you have any specific comments. So I'll hand over to Professor Rohini Godbole.
So good evening, everybody. Thanks very much to all the office bearers of IIT-ACB for inviting me to this webinar. When I was preparing for this webinar, a friend told me a statement by the physicist Slizard. So he was asked once, what should one assume? And he said, you should assume infinite intelligence and coupled with perhaps infinite ignorance. So since these are IIT alumni, I will assume infinite intelligence. And that, of course, relieves me of much of the tension as to whether what I say would be followable or not. To begin with, let me tell you that I have changed the title a little bit and made it a little less ambitious, because I realized that shedding light on the dark matter in all its aspects is not possible within uh, the short time, and plus also includes areas of darkness in my own understanding in some of the issues. Therefore, I have decided to focus on the shedding light on the dark matter at the Large Hadron Collider, and that is the part where I have myself been able to do some, make some contributions. So this will be based essentially on how one can look for the dark matter at the Large Hadron Collider and why one should be looking for it, so on and so forth. So the plan of the talk is very simple. I will start with a discussion of current state of particle physics. And in the subject of particle physics, that has to begin by singing the psalm of the Standard Model. Then the next question comes, and this is also very much implied because of various news items that one sees beginning from New York Times, is that is there life for a particle physicist after the Higgs discovery? And as I would try to argue for you, I would show you that the dark matter is the one of the next frontier to cross for a particle physicist. And therefore, I would like to take that up. Having established it, I will try to tell you what one can do at the Large Hadron Collider and to look for the dark matter. So to begin with, let me just describe very briefly something that is very well known and very well accepted, is the accepted worldview of the fundamental particles, or the fundamental constituents of nature. And I think one of the biggest achievements of the 20th century has been that the fundamental constituents of matter are fundamental particles called quarks and leptons, and they interact with each other through four forces, and out of which three elementary forces, fundamental forces, are themselves mediated by elementary particles such as the photon, the W and the Z boson, and the gluon. And to make this entire picture fit and make it consistent with the theory of relativity and quantum mechanics, in fact, what we need is the omnipresent Higgs boson. And this is basically the picture that of the fundamental particles and the interactions among them that we have now. And this is the Standard Model. And for this to be unified, it stands on these two pillars of quantum mechanics as well as the theory of relativity. But there is a third ingredient, and which is why we need the Higgs boson. And that ingredient is the so-called gauge principle. So this is what the accepted worldview of particles, fundamental particles, and interactions among them is. Now you would say, all right, this is maybe of interest to 5,000, 10,000 particle physicists the world over. Why should the rest of us bother about it? But what is interesting is that the laws of physics, particle physics, which one has first found out by performing experiments, one has found that they function at the distance scales of even Fermis and smaller. They seem to be of relevance in addressing things that happen in the universe or happened in the universe on cosmological timescales, like the beginning of the universe, as well as at astronomical distance scales, like millions of megaparsecs and above. In fact, the laws of particle physics that we have established, and that is what the accepted worldview is, helps us in understanding answers to the questions such that how was everything formed? How did the nucleons form? Can we explain the relative abundance of different elements in the universe? How did the stars form? How did the galaxies form? Of course, the astrophysicists, astrophysics, the laws of classical physics all come into picture there. but an essential ingredient is also the known physics of the standard model of particle physics. So therefore, this is not just for particle physicists, but this is for everybody. As I said already, that it is never enough to that there are, I also talk about fundamental particles, and I also talked about how those particles constituents are glued together. And though that glue, as I call, is the mortar, and the 4 fundamental interactions are also mediated by fundamental particles, which I already mentioned. And in fact, as a result of the very hard work on part of theorists, experimentalists, accelerator builders, and what have you, now the entire set of equations of motions of these fundamental particles under the action of these fundamental forces that can be written at the back of a jacket or a t-shirt, and that's what this is. This is a t-shirt which you can go and buy in the shop at CERN, which is the laboratory at which the Large Hadron Collider is situated. So this is the state of standard model of particle physics. In fact, before July 4, 2014, the first 3 lines of this Lagrangian, I'm assuming that most of us have some acquaintance with Lagrangian mechanics, but if you don't have it, doesn't matter. This is what we derive the equations of motions from. That much is enough. And now, this last line of this theory was not tested completely tested till July 4, 2014. And for this entire theoretical construct to be proven true, we needed to find the Higgs boson. Indeed, the stakes were very high. And the Large Hadron Collider, LHC, was built to look for this Higgs boson, which was the only spin-zero, spinless elementary particle that we know at present. And this was indeed one of the Higgs events, which was displayed on the July 4th that I mentioned a bit earlier. And this is a reconstruction of the event as the experimentalists will show it. And what was seen in the experiment was 2 very, very energetic photons, an event containing 2 energetic photons in a PP collision. I would like you to remember how these pictures look, because I'm going to come back to some of these pictures later again when I'm going to discuss how we will possibly look for the dark matter at the Large Hadron Collider. So in some sense, this discovery of the Higgs was the terminus for the train of the standard model, which had been going along, chugging along for a few decades. So this was a very nice cartoon, which I liked, which shows the LHC in the background. And there is this physicist standing here, and she says, "We have discovered what nothingness is made up of." And her colleague says, "Of course, it's quite something." And indeed, I think this cartoon, however, though it is sort of joking, it really tells us the importance of this discovery. All right. You will say, all right, we understand this was very important. Of course, it got the Nobel Prize. It finished a beautiful picture. Why are you still telling me about this? So a natural question that comes is that, is there life for particle physicists after the Higgs discovery? Because this sounds like a pretty complete theory, tied, closed, tied up with a nice bow and given to the human community, saying that, yes, this is what it is. Now, luckily, there is still life for particle physicists after the Higgs discovery. Now, you might even ask, am I just saying this because we want to keep our jobs? Actually, the answer is no. Particle physicists had started looking at what after Higgs decades ago. And this is what we call physics beyond the standard model. And it is just that we have not yet found any proof for any of the big ideas that the field had produced. I will go on to talk about it in a little more detail. So if this sounds mysterious, just bear with me. So I should like to tell you that the particle physics finds itself in an extremely peculiar place. I can steal from the first few lines of The Tale of Two Cities. And of course, with apologies to Charles Dickens and apologies to a friend of mine from whom I stole the idea of quoting these lines. The first line of Tale of Two Cities is, it's the best of the time, it's the worst of the times. We have found the standard model Higgs boson. We have proved the standard model. And we have no glimmer of the physics beyond standard model, particles and interactions beyond standard model, that the observed Higgs properties promises. And this last statement that I just now made, that the observed Higgs properties promise that there must be some physics, some interactions, some particles beyond the standard model. So let me try to sort of go into it a little bit later. But right now, this is the point is that we have found the Higgs boson, which was basically, as I said, required to establish that the entire particle world is described in terms of the gauge principle. And now, however, the same basic consistency ideas also demanded that there should be some particle, some interaction beyond standard model, and we haven't seen it. So that's why it is the best of the times and it is the worst of the times. We can also feel a bit like Lord Kelvin. For some of you, if we remember, the Kelvin temperature scale is named after him. At the end of the 19th century, he thought there is nothing new to be discovered in physics now. All that remains is more and more precise measurement because everything is explained in terms of classical physics, except he missed a very small cloud on the horizon, and we all know what that cloud was, and the rest is history. Mere mortals today actually can be pardoned for thinking that all that remains now is perhaps more and more precise measurements of the Higgs and the top properties. What are the reasons for this agonizing? It's just the arrogance of physicists. Actually not. What it means is that are there any other clouds hanging on the horizon that tell us that there is something beyond what we understand? So this is here I would like to share with all of you, my non-particle physicist friends, that we did not start asking the question, what beyond the Higgs, after the Higgs had been found. There were both observational and aesthetic reasons, and various clouds on the horizon, which were observations, and most observational reasons actually came from cosmic connections. Remember, I told you in the beginning that the laws of particle physics have implications for things that happened long back, maybe at the beginning of the universe, or at cosmological distance scales at the large, huge distances. So what are these cosmic connections? The first and the foremost is that after having shown you, jumping up and down, that we have found all the fundamental constituents of nature and how they interact with each other, the contents of our periodic table seem to account for only 5% of the total matter in the universe. And the astrophysical evidence really seems pretty convincing. And as a result of that, this, if you look here on the left plot, I have given you the energy budget of the universe. Let us not even go here with what we call dark energy, what are the reasons to believe in it, and what are the theoretical implications. I wouldn't go into this. I am going to deal with this little part of the pie, which is together, as you can see, 27 plus 5, about 32% of the total energy budget of the universe. And the entire set of elementary particles that I talked about account only for this 4.9%. So the 26.8% of matter that we know in the universe is actually dark. What does it mean by that? We are not able to see, it's not luminous. And I will try to explain in a few minutes, but you can take it that none of the particles in the table of the fundamental particles that we have now very proudly completed, we don't have a candidate which can be a dark matter candidate. And therefore, this particular experimental information about the dark matter tells us that there exists at least one particle beyond the standard model, and that is what we call BSM. But let me also tell you that we are able to draw this conclusion only because we understand the interaction of the standard model particles, not just now, but also in the early universe. because of these things, we are able to draw this very firm conclusion that existence of dark matter, which forms the 80% of the matter in the universe, tells us that there exists at least one particle that is outside the framework of the Standard Model. Actually, where did the evidence first begin? It's the astrophysicists who came to the conclusion that there exists this dark matter. And let me just begin where at the beginning, this astrophysical evidence started from Zwicky somewhere around 1927. He tried to measure the mass of the galaxy from the speed at which the rotational velocities of the different constituents, nebulae, etc., in a galaxy cluster or in the galaxy of the different stars. And he concluded that there must be much more than the visible mass inside the galaxy if the components of the galaxy which were moving at that speed had to be held together by gravitation. That is, if you said that the mass was exactly given by the luminous mass in the galaxy, then it would not be clear at all what these guys moving at a very high speed, why they just simply fly up, go away, and why do they remain bound in the galaxy. So this was Zwicky's idea, but it was really put firmly in place first by very painstaking observations by Vera Rubin, whose photograph I have shown you in the left here. And what she did, and what many people following her did, is that they measured the speed of rotation of different stars in a given galaxy, or speeds of rotations of galaxies in a cluster of galaxies. And most of the galaxies that we see in the universe are actually spiral galaxies, a big fraction, and the stars seem to be rotating. And if I just use Newton's law of gravitation, you will be able to do a two-line calculation and show that the velocity of rotation in the plane, this is a spiral galaxy, in the plane will actually be simply given by capital G Newton's constant, mass that is enclosed inside the orbit, and the distance r from the center of the galaxy. Because the galaxies usually have a bulge at the center, and then stars slowly go on thinning out. Now, for example, I have taken this star F and a star N. F and N are far and near. If, for example, the star F was at a distance 4 times the star N, then by this formula, you would imagine that the velocity of F should be twice, 1/2 times the velocity of N. But in fact, what she saw was something completely different. And this is what is indicated in this plot here, that you expected the velocity to go down by that formula, but what you found is that the velocity actually doesn't go down as you go away and away from the nucleus of the galaxy. And that just means that this enclosed mass m must increase as the radius r of the orbit increases. All right. I could here show you some really nice movies of galaxies rotating, and I have given here below a YouTube link, which you can see, and it's really very impressive. But the velocities of this rotation are extremely small, not more than 100 kilometers or 200 kilometers per second. And since these galaxies at the distance scales of parsecs, megaparsecs, and even further, this measurement of these velocities is quite a big job, and it's done very carefully, and it's a complicated job. And Vera Rubin and her collaborator Ford did it for the first time in 1970, and these black points are her points of her observation. And then soon after that, her measurement in 1975, there came another set of measurements by Roberts and company, and which really showed that this rotation velocity, which is in kilometers per second, and which is of the order of 200 to 300 kilometers per second, I already told you. And this was measurements done in a galaxy called M31. And then this was further confirmed in the much more accurate measurements in 2006. On the right-hand side, I have given you a plot of very recent measurement for another galaxy, M33. And in this galaxy, you can see that this dashed line is what one would expect if the mass m was limited by what you could expected from what was seen in the disk of the galaxy. But what was actually seen, the velocity, both from starlights as well as from looking at Doppler shift of the 21 centimeter hydrogen line, people actually measured these rotation curves. And as you can see here, again, the velocities of the order of 100 to 200 kilometers per second. And therefore, there are few things that we can already see, that this kind of rotational curve measurements proved quite strongly that there exists dark matter, but people were not so easily convinced. In fact, you can tweak the law of gravitation, because the only input that goes here is this. So people actually tweaked the Newtonian gravity, saying that perhaps it doesn't hold good at these large distances and what have you. And therefore, they had given some formulation of modified theory of Newtonian gravity. But as later on, as time went by, more and more evidence for the dark matter was accumulating. Here I have shown you at the level of galaxy clusters, collision of two galaxies in a cluster called Bullet cluster. And what you see here in this picture, you will notice, I will go to the next slide, I will explain it more clearly. This red region is where the galaxy collision is actually photographed using X-rays, which means that this red region contains matter which is luminous because it emits X-rays. Whereas these blue regions are the regions which were photographed using the so-called gravitational lensing, which means the only thing that we know for sure is that the material in the blue region is not luminous, but it has gravitational interaction. So this is what it was done. This is the Bullet cluster in the galaxy collision that has been pictured. As I said already, blue is the picture that is obtained in gravitational lensing. Red is the image in X-ray. So now we see that there is more matter in these clusters than is visible to us, and that is the dark matter. Even today, more and more distant galaxy clusters are being studied, and people are still trying to obtain information on dark matter using gravitational lensing, and some very interesting papers have appeared just very recently. In fact, we had a seminar in our department 1 week ago on some of the latest observations. And this imaging of the dark matter is like we see crystal structure through diffraction patterns. What you do is that there is a light behind this, there is galaxy, and a galaxy behind, between us and these objects, these cluster collisions are happening. They are in the line of sight from us to some other galaxy, and that galaxy, light from that galaxy actually can get, when it passes through the vicinity of this, gets the bending of light happens, and we can see imaging of the various images of a galaxy which is lying behind somewhere, whose position we know. And that's how one can then understand the mass distribution in this blue area by looking at the images that one sees, multiple images that one sees in on the Earth of a distant galaxy, which is between, and the colliding galaxies are between us and the galaxy we are observing. Last but not the least, and I think perhaps one of the most another important pointer to the existence of dark matter came from the anisotropy of the cosmic microwave background radiation. And these measurements actually tell us that there is a dark matter at the scale of the visible universe. I think I will not be able to simply, in some simple arguments, it will take me too long to try to explain how this happens. But the point to note is that there is strong evidence for the existence of dark matter at almost all distance scales, at galaxies, which are at kiloparsec, at clusters of galaxies, which are million parsec, and the observable universe, which is gigaparsec. Remember, 1 parsec is defined by the distance that the light travels, right? So this is defined in terms of light years. So this is the solar system is actually smaller than a parsec. So, and the other important point is that the dark matter velocities in today's universe, in the galactic halos, in the clusters of galaxies, are about of the order of 100 to 200 kilometers per second, and that's all that we know about them. The second cosmic puzzle has been, and I think that's a big puzzle and a big challenge for particle physics, is that in principle, the early universe had equal matter and antimatter. But universe of today seems to have a matter-antimatter asymmetry. We seem to be only matter in this universe and everywhere else. An explanation of this matter and antimatter asymmetry in the universe in terms of the known properties of the standard model particles, a particular property called CP violation, which we actually measure in laboratory. This is possible to explain this matter-antimatter asymmetry in terms of this measurement. And just to tell you, the measurements are quite spectacular, that in the early universe, number of baryons and number of antibaryons were equal. But now we see that the number of baryons to number of photons is 6.1 into 10 to the minus 10, whereas number of antibaryons to photon is 0. A quantitative explanation of this number actually requires and indicates some particles, some interaction outside the standard model. So therefore, at least there are two big observational reasons, dark matter and this baryon-antibaryon asymmetry, for which standard model is simply not enough. So the observational reasons for imagining that there are particles and interactions beyond the standard model, I have tried to list a few of them. One of them is that, as I explained in great detail, that the dark matter makes up about 27% of the universe. And this was awarded a Nobel Prize in 2019. Then we also have this part I will not touch in my talk, but I should be remiss if I didn't include that as the observational reason for physics beyond standard model. And that is the fact that neutrinos have non-zero masses. This was a Nobel Prize in physics in 2015. I have already told you that there is a need to understand why matter dominates the universe. There is a matter-antimatter asymmetry in the universe, and we still don't understand. And this is something that would certainly get a Nobel Prize once we understand this completely. Then we have found a light Higgs boson at the Large Hadron Collider. And this was the Physics Nobel Prize of 2013. And this is one of the aesthetic reasons why, if we find such a light Higgs boson, our theories, quantum field theories, let us believe that we must have some additional interactions which keep the mass of the Higgs boson comparable to the mass of the top quark or the mass of the W boson and mass of the Z boson. In the absence of that, we don't understand theoretically why the Higgs mass should be as small as it is. Then there are two others which I will not cover here, so I will leave them. But they are one is about the fact that the universe is continuously accelerating, and this is behind our idea of dark energy. And this also got a Nobel Prize in 2011 for the observation. And we also feel the force of gravity, but we do not have a quantum description of gravity. The last two I will not cover here at all. This one also I will not cover, but the first, third, and the fourth are the 3 points which I would like you to remember as reasons of physics beyond standard model, because that's where I'm going to go along with this in the next step. So one of the theoretical ideas that keeps the Higgs light, remember here I said that we have found a light Higgs boson. And this particular point, that if the Higgs boson should be found to be light, we all were worrying about theoretically how we explain that mass. And in fact, one of the most beautiful ideas which explains this is called supersymmetry, which says that associated with every particle, there is a supersymmetric partner. In fact, this book that Abha mentioned was Abha mentioned the book on the women, sorry, but this book was also published around the same time in 2006. And at that time, we had actually given ideas how these supersymmetric partners can be looked for at the Large Hadron Collider. For the symmetry to be able to explain why the Higgs mass is small, we needed to find partners of the top quarks with a mass less than, if we multiply that mass by c square, we wanted mc squared to be less than 1000 GeV. So far, LHC has looked for it. That was supposed to be one way to probe the BSM, which we had actually discussed in this book. So far, the experiments have not yielded any evidence for these partners of the top quark. But there is some other feature of this supersymmetric theories, which again is very, very attractive, that the theory has a ready-made dark matter candidate. So the next obvious question comes, can we look for the dark matter candidate, and can we look to SUSY through this window? So that is the question that many people like me wanted to ask as soon as the Higgs boson was found. So actually there, as I already told you, these big questions for particle physics have existed for quite a few years, even way before Higgs boson was found. And there have been a number of very big ideas. And the most sort of compelling physics idea was actually supersymmetry, and which in fact you will see in this bar chart says that it also actually provided capability of answering almost all these big questions, and many of us were actually spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to look for evidence of this beautiful theory at anywhere in the universe for that matter, but in particular at the Large Hadron Collider. And as I just now said, LHC has not obliged us by giving us evidence for these particles. So maybe the truth is more subtle and more complicated than what we imagined, and we have to tease the truth out of the data with great careful combing. Who knows? Maybe that is the future. And that's what I meant by saying that maybe future is a more accurate measurements. So, one had designed the Large Hadron Collider, that is the community had designed the Large Hadron Collider, and this physicist, she is standing here, and when she was looking at the LHC at the horizon, she was imagining that LHC will not only find the Higgs boson, but will also find particles which we are postulating such that they explain the dark matter and the baryon asymmetry in the universe. Now, the community has reached this one peak. We have reached this peak, but then we realize that actually from a distance, all these three peaks seem to coexist, but the peak of the dark matter and the peak of the baryon asymmetry in the universe and many such things are still some distance away, and we still have to figure out how we can look at it. And therefore, maybe standing on this peak of the Higgs has provided us with an elevation. And it's like this, that by now I can use a telescope maybe, and those telescopes are the observations of the precision properties of the various standard model particles. So that is what we all believe. So the idea now is that the discovery of the Higgs, and of course the top quark, which was already known, measurement of the properties of the top and the Higgs boson, one could peep at the BSM land through this window by throwing it open, because the properties of the Higgs, a lot of properties of the Higgs are actually decided again because of the same gauge principles, Curd-C gauge principle, both top and the Higgs. And therefore, any deviations from the predictions in the standard model might actually help us to look at this picture, the landscape beyond standard model. And in fact, the day Higgs boson was discovered and discovery was announced, it already removed a lot of our wonderful ideas, and now it is marching relentlessly, removing more and more areas. For example, there is this MSSM or NMSSM and SUSY, etc., etc. And we are right now searching for these physics beyond standard model at the LHC through the window of the properties of the Higgs and the top. Okay, now I could take a pause here, and then I could go on to tell you how one looks for the dark matter, because what I have tried to tell you right now here is two separate points. One point is that we have a very wonderful description of all the particles and the interactions among them that we see all around us, and which have implications for things happened in the early universe. We are able to have a complete picture of that, a beautiful theoretical description. And at the same time, we have some very pressing theoretical experimental problems, as well as some aesthetic problems. The pressing observational problems, one of the most pressing at present, is really the dark matter and the baryon asymmetry in the universe and the non-zero neutrino mass. The ones that I am trying to focus on is the dark matter itself. So observation of the dark matter now is established astrophysically in a very, very big way. And some of the ideas that particle physicists have proposed, supersymmetry being the leading one, actually have a ready-made candidate for the dark matter. And therefore, the question that one wants to ask is that how does one look for dark matter in general? And how does one look for the dark matter at a Large Hadron Collider? So this is what I want to discuss next, but I'm happy to take a pause here and a break where we can have some questions. Urjit, over to you.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Rohini, that you summarized also at the halfway point very nicely by saying how the Higgs has consolidated a lot of things, and yet we do not know some of the things that are indicated to us by cosmology. There are quite a few questions on dark matter. And before I pose to you, maybe I should make a general statement that may address quite a few of them, which is that our normal matter is made of so-called baryons and leptons, which is protons, neutrons, or electrons. And we are reasonably sure, almost certain, that dark matter does not carry any of these quantum numbers. So it is something completely exotic. It cannot be baryons. That is sort of established. But now let me throw open the questions, and Rohini could answer them. The two questions are about the basic picture of dark matter. For example, can there be antiparticles for dark matter? And there is another question, which is, can dark matter be made up of atoms too? And that I tried to kind of answer in advance by saying cannot be ordinary matter. But does it have antimatter as well?
Okay. Can you still hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay, thanks. No, this is a good question. Can there be anti-dark matter? And to be honest, we don't, until and unless we know much more about dark matter, we won't be able to tell if there is anti-dark matter. Dark matter, from what we can see, since it's neutral, it has to be its own antiparticle. Okay,
yes. So
there are some small theoretical differences.
Quantum theory would require that there is
statement about whether they are Majorana or Dirac fermions. I'm imagining that the person who has asked this question perhaps knows those things, but we are far from anywhere where we can actually answer such questions. Right now, as I would take next steps and try to explain to you, those kinds of questions definitely depend on our model for the dark matter particle. However, the general statements that Urjit made already can be made, namely what we know for sure, and maybe I will go in the next slide and I will tell you what we know for sure about dark matter. But what we know is that it cannot have strong interactions. It of course is not luminous, so it doesn't have electromagnetic interaction. And many of these things are actually told to us because if the particles had, for example, strong interactions, there are some huge problems that will appear in explaining the structure formation in the theory of the early universe.
Yes, yes. So the next question is actually related to that, because two persons have asked, what would go wrong if all of dark matter disappeared today or wasn't there?
Very good. What would happen if the dark matter was not there? We wouldn't be here. The galaxies wouldn't have been formed. Because actually right now with the accepted theory of, that is why I spent some time on that slide when I was trying to tell you that it is the combination of the laws of particle physics as well as the astrophysical understanding, the cosmologists who have developed the model, how structures were formed. So galaxies and galaxy clusters wouldn't have formed if there was no dark matter, because dark matter provided the initial gravitational attraction with the seed for the formation of the galaxies. That is what the current accepted picture. One has done simulations of galaxy formations and one finds that without enough dark matter, you wouldn't have formed the structures that we have formed. And in fact, that is what I said, this cosmic microwave background radiation measurements and anisotropies in it actually give us a handle on the dark matter. But that is the part that I tried to say, that is a part more for astrophysicists and cosmologists to dwell upon, and I would not want to spend too much time in trying to explain, but I hope that the basic physics is conveyed in what I've tried to say just now.
Yes, so let me put across two other questions which are related, but probably out of the direct issues you are trying to address. But one question says, how are the X-ray images taken, since you showed bullet cluster?
Yeah, this is really beyond my knowledge. When my astronomer friends tell me that they take an image using, for example, on our AstroSat, we have some X-ray spectrometers and what have you. I don't know this particular picture.
You do need a telescope which is outside of our atmosphere. It has to be in the orbit. Otherwise,
so these are deep field probes. But more than that, I don't know.
It has to be satellite based.
It has to be satellite based. It's outside. But more than that's why I said AstroSat is the closest example I can give people. But right now, actually, these deep field surveys, which are being done by space from outer space, are doing some very wonderful measurements using various types of.
And Rajiv Tikku also thinks that how could we tell that the bullet cluster had undergone a collision, because we only have a snapshot right now.
Okay, right now all I can tell you is that I am no astronomer. Astronomers have their own ways of telling and confirming these things. And at this point, I am only picking up the one image that they showed me or rest of the community to convince them, okay? I mean, I wouldn't be able to tell more about the measurements, frankly.
Okay, there are a large number of questions. There is one from Ali Contractor, which says, you said that known elements account for only 5% of the periodic table. Can you elaborate, please?
Oh, I think I was too fast. What I wanted to say that the periodic table of particle physics, namely the fundamental particles that we list, then namely electrons, neutrino, muons, associated muon, neutrino, tau, associated tau lepton, up, down, strange, charm, and top and bottom quark. I call this periodic table of particle physics. And all I'm saying is that only 5% of the total matter in the universe is accounted for by the members of this particle physics periodic table. So this is just I have borrowed the word from periodic table of the regular atomic physics, and I'm using it for particle physics. That these are the fundamental constituents. This is the list of all the fundamental constituents. Everything matter, all is consisting only of these fundamental constituents, and all the matter in the universe accounts for, such matter accounts only for 5% of the total amount of energy budget of the universe.
So Praveen Gupta has a question. Hubble law did not consider dark matter. What will happen about expansion? Can I answer that quickly by saying in Hubble's times, things were known very crudely. We didn't know the entire matter and energy balance very well. Yes. But the expansion is continuing. It is just exactly as Hubble had said. There is a question, are there alternate models to currently accepted definition of mass? And has this approach been tried in the context of dark matter? Can you have some?
Well, frankly, I don't know what is the alternate definition of mass, to be honest, because the only mass that I know is defined through gravitational interaction.
Yes.
And at least I am not able to fathom the question.
We do know that people are proposing non-Newtonian gravity, right?
No, that is different. That I already mentioned.
Right.
That I already mentioned. I mean, and that I said that the bullet cluster collision, galaxy collision is really ruled that out.
And then from Srinivas Sudarshanam, what exactly happens at the interface between matter and dark matter? There has to be somewhere that both have come face to face.
Okay, I think I will talk about that in a few minutes. That will be definitely part of my next few slides.
Correct. Okay. Einstein, this is Praveen Gupta. Einstein said that laws of physics have to be same everywhere. Does dark matter not follow this? It does. It obeys gravity. And there is a question from Hina Sheikh, which is the most fundamental one, Rohini. You have to answer this.
Okay.
From where does dark matter come?
Sorry?
From where does dark matter come?
No, that's an extremely important question. And I believe the whole point about the story is that you have to go back and understand dark matter comes from precisely the same place where all the matter came from. Namely, initially the universe was simply energy. And as the universe evolved, some of this energy actually got converted into different types of particles. And somewhere along the line, dark matter was also produced, just like ordinary matter was produced. Okay? And that is a long story about the entire evolution of the early evolution of the universe. But I will talk about how one sort of tries to compute the dark matter, try to compute from first principles, how one will know how much dark matter should be left over from the early universe till now. So I think I will deal with that in the next few slides.
Good. Yeah, and there are a couple of questions. One dealing with black holes, right, dark matter and black holes, and one dealing with a fifth force, a new force of nature that may be obeyed by dark matter. So we know that there are, of course, black hole models of dark matter. There could be some matter hidden.
As I said, some of these things will come in a few slides. I would not explicitly mention them. And the fifth force is something, or additional interaction will come along. I will mention that. So right. Maybe not exactly as a fifth force, but it will come along somewhere.
Right, right. Yes. Okay, so I think we could go along to the next part of your talk, Rohini.
Okay, so thanks, Urjit. And let me sort of thank everybody for these questions. And let me try to say that all I have, maybe that will become clear in a few minutes. So let me just say, because I had made two different things. One is I have told you about dark matter. And second, I have told you I want to look through the portal of the Higgs as a collider physicist. So let me just tell you how many, just to give you an idea, how many Higgses will be produced at the Large Hadron Collider. Until to date, from the 2012 announcement, the Large Hadron Collider has produced about 7 million Higgses. Of course, not all of them can be detected, but this just tells you that now you can look at rare events that happen when a Higgs particle decays. And in particular, I will talk about whether there are any additional exotic decays of the Higgs particle for the particular type of beyond standard model physics that which would have the potential to solve one of the big puzzles. So I will explicitly take one of the examples, and I will say that in supersymmetric theories, such exotic decays of the Higgs into dark matter particles can happen. So I guess I will, to some extent, people will see how dark standard model and dark matter particles can come face to face, so to say. And then how to look for them in the detectors is what I will then mention. But before I do that, it's a good thing to summarize what is it that we know about dark matter. The first thing I want to tell you that as anything that we know about dark matter so far, all comes from astrophysics. It comes from the rotational curves of the galaxies. It comes from the galaxy studies of galactic clusters and the gravitational lensing. It comes from measurement of the cosmic microwave background radiation and the anisotropies in it. And these are the relics which are left from the early universe from the Big Bang. That's how we understand them. And in the standard model of cosmology, which deals with how, for example, in the first 3 minutes, the elements were formed, and so on and so forth, exactly the same ideas can follow through. The direct experimental evidence exists for the dark matter only for the gravitational interaction. That is the direct experimental evidence. However, we know, and this I explained already, that we know that structures would not have been formed unless dark matter existed. So dark matter had to be created in the early universe. And the dark matter density, or the numbers of dark matter particles per unit volume, this is called relic density, relics of the early Big Bang. And these expected relic density calculations can be done. And these predictions are determined by two things. One is the theoretical understanding of the early universe, the cosmology of the early universe, and at the same time, the particle content of the particles in the early universe and their interactions with each other and with radiation. So the whole point is that in the very early universe, one had radiation. Now these radiation photons, for example, could collide with each other, and it created a soup of particles and antiparticles. And these particles and antiparticles can actually collide again and produce something else. That something else may be a pair of dark matter particles. The dark matter particles will collide and produce back the standard model particles. And in the early universe, when there is a lot of energy available, and when all the particles are close together, both directions, the reactions can keep on going on in a big way. But the universe is slowly expanding. As the universe goes on slowly expanding, beyond a certain time in the expansion, what happens is that only reactions, only producing the particles, for example, the dark matter particles, can happen, but the two dark matter particles cannot find each other well enough to go backwards and produce the reverse reaction. So that is called the dark matter particles will fall out of equilibrium. And then that is why we would have today this dark matter relic density. So it's a truly astroparticle physics object. It needs understanding of cosmology. It depends on cosmology and understanding. It depends on the interactions of the particles as are given by the particle physics, and figuring out how and if there will be any differences to these laws in the early universe. So this is truly an astroparticle physics object. And in the current understanding, the dark matter particle will have to have some other interaction other than the gravitational interaction. We have already discussed and argued that since we cannot see it, it cannot be the electromagnetic interaction, it is not luminous, it cannot be strong for reasons that Urjit already explained. So it has to be some version of the weak interaction. And in the standard model, it would be then mixture of weak and electroweak interactions somehow. But right now, to be honest, we don't know what that interaction, the strength of that interaction is, or what is the type of that interaction. The data simply are not there. And that is the point that I would try to take next. Strictly speaking, we do not have any observation which will also constrain its mass. So in fact, and the last but not the least, as I just already said, it has implications for structure formations, for formation of galaxies and galaxy clusters. And that actually tells us that if this dark matter has to provide the potential well, then at the time of these galaxy formations, the dark matter should actually be moving at very low speeds like it is moving today. And therefore, what is light is the dark matter particle, which would be in thermal equilibrium with radiation in the early universe, but then it will fall out of the thermal equilibrium when it is still non-relativistic, so that it can move very slowly and therefore provide the necessary potential well for the stars and galaxies to form, for the structures to form. And this is called cold dark matter. This cold dark matter, in the next two slides, bear with me, I'll show you that we imagine that this should be interacting weakly, and that is why that is the typical strength of the weak interactions. And therefore, weakly interacting massive particle called WIMP is the paradigm that has ruled for a long, long time, but that too is under tension. Just like I told you that we have found the Higgs, but we have not found the associated particles or interactions which we imagine must exist to keep the Higgs to produce the Higgs properties that the way we have seen them. So these are just like that is under tension. This is also under tension because we have not been able to see yet the weakly interacting massive particle that one expects dark matter to be, or one expected and still expects for the dark matter to be. So this slide I have actually stolen from my friend Hitoshi Murayama, and I can tell you that from basic cosmological and astrophysical observations, and from the measurement of the dark matter as we see it today, moving at the velocities of 200 kilometers or 100 kilometers per second in the galaxies, in the galaxy clusters, etc. Even if that were to be true, we do not know the mass could be anywhere in this big range. And I have not even gone to the, you can see it here, for example, from 10 to the minus 30 giga electron volts. That simply means that a mass times velocity of light square is 10 to the minus 30 GeV. And in principle, it could anywhere between the 10 minus 30 GeV to 10 to the 50 GeV. And I have kind of expanded between the 10 to the minus 10 to 10 to the 6. Okay, this is this range, where again, even now in our theories, particle theories, we have various candidates for these dark matters. But the one that is most liked by most of the theoretical considerations that I told you is here, that is between 10 to the 1 GeV to about 10 to the 2 GeV or 3 GeV. So it is this range that people have been looking at in the dark matter detection experiments, which have been specifically constructed. And I will come to that in a minute, how people constructed and looked for them. So this is the range that this talk will focus on, not because, this is not important, but simply this is where the effort has actually been concentrated over the past few decades. And we know something about what the nature is trying to tell you in this mass region, if the dark matter particle had a mass in this region. So the measurements of the anisotropy, okay, actually tells us, and this is something that the dark matter density, energy density in certain units, you may please forget that this is dimensionless, and that would be 0.120. This is a very accurate measurement. And this Rayleigh density, this number, is calculated in terms of mass of the dark matter candidate. And typically I'm denoting it by chi. So m chi stands for the mass of the dark matter candidate. N chi stands for its Rayleigh density, that is the number density. Then that is the number of particles per unit volume, divided by the critical density, which will close the universe in units of that density. What we find is that this expression is a pretty approximate but a robust expression, that this is equal to 3 into 10 to the minus 27 centimeters square per second, divided by the velocity averaged annihilation cross section. Remember, I told you that the Rayleigh density will be decided by how much the dark matter candidates can annihilate into other particles in the final state. As time goes on, and as they find it more and more difficult to find each other, they will stop annihilating, and beyond that, the Rayleigh density will remain unchanged, and that will be essentially decided by this number. And now you see that this is the measurement, and if you want to get a number in a model of the order of 0.1, you would need the annihilation cross section, velocity averaged annihilation cross section, to be something of the order of 10 to the minus 26 centimeters square per second. At this point, we have no idea what are the interactions of this dark matter candidate, but whatever it is, its annihilation cross section averaged over velocity, if it is of the order of 10 to the minus 26 centimeters square, then you would find a predicted Rayleigh which agrees with the actual observed Rayleigh density. So then the couplings of the dark matter particle which decide the annihilation cross section will decide, as you can see here, what is the Rayleigh density, and this is going to be decided by the model. And there are some arguments which I will right now not go into, but for example, in general, you would imagine that the cross section in a model independent way should depend on 1 over the square of the dark matter mass particle. So it is g chi square over m chi square, and combinations of different g chi and m chi actually can produce the right relic. So therefore, we will find the right relic for different masses of m chi depending on the g chi. And this sigma annihilation, that is really what is controlled, that is the g chi is what is really controlled by the particle physics model. And since we know nothing about its mass in this range, and our theories will have to tell us that for a given mass, what would be the annihilation cross section, and then whether in that model for that mass, the annihilation cross section is enough to give rise to the observed relic, because that is an observed fact and a model will have to explain it. So this is the first point of contact between a particle physics model and the observed relic density of the dark matter. So how can we detect? So this is how can the dark matter come face to face with standard model particles. So how do we detect it? So actually one of the what is called the direct detection is that we know there are this is the sea and wind of dark matter everywhere around us. So a WIMP particle would come and there is a deep underground, actually it hits a nucleus. Let's say people use a heavy nucleus like xenon, and the dark matter particle, this particular measurement is that the dark matter particle comes, hits this xenon nucleus, and what you measure is the recoil energy of this nucleus. Now remember that the dark matter particle has to have a mass, at least this will work for a dark matter particle when the mass is between 1 and about 1,000 times the mass of the proton, and a xenon nucleus is about 100 times the mass of a proton. So therefore, in this kind of collision, then the recoil energy of the xenon nucleus can be easily calculated as a function of the mass of the dark matter particle, and the expected typical recoil energy for the dark matter particle in this range, that is m chi in this particular range, 1 times the proton mass or up to 1,000 times the proton mass. The recoil energy is roughly about 100 keV. Now please realize this. Xenon itself is a very heavy object. It has 100 times the mass of a proton, more than that perhaps. And the proton has the mass which is 1,000, it's 1 giga electron volts, which is 1,000 million electron volts, and therefore 10 to the 6 electron volts. So now you can begin to understand that it's a very gigantically very difficult measurement, and this kind of measurements are done to make a very clean and quiet environment. People have to go deep underground, and that's where these experiments are done. So this is the typical direct detection of dark matter. And since we know nothing about its interaction cross sections, what these experiments have been just looking for is there a evidence for scattering? And if you don't find any such scattering, if you don't find the nucleus recoiling with a certain energy, that means that you can only put a limit on the cross section that the dark matter candidate can have with the xenon nucleus at a given mass. So this is a kind of a very big experiment, and there is a latest answer that has come from an experiment called Xenon 1 ton. It contains 1 ton of xenon, and this was done for 1 year. And what they really find is that the WIMP to nucleon cross section, they have been able to not see any evidence, as a result of which they're saying that as a function of the WIMP mass, they can only put a limit as to how small the WIMP nucleon cross section is. And now you have to ask yourself a question: in a given model, in your model, for a given strength of interaction of the dark matter particle with the rest of the standard model particles, can you produce a possibility that it would have avoided detection in this particular experiment, and at the same time would have explained and is able to give rise to this particular relic density through this formula? So now these are the two observations. One observation is that you have this relic density of dark matter, and another observation that direct detection has not been able to see it up to this size of the cross sections. So whatever model you put out for your dark matter particle, and mind you, we don't know what this dark matter particle is unless we consider a particular model. These are the two observational constraints that your model will have to satisfy. So in fact, how can you detect it at the LHC? So I already told you that in the early universe, in the description, to produce the relic density, we must have had these processes where the two standard model particles collided to produce two dark matter particles, or two dark matter particles collided to produce standard model particles. And when these two reactions in the forward and backward direction went out of equilibrium, that is what gave rise to the dark matter relic density. Now you use the same basic process in direct detection. All you do is that there is a dark matter particle incident on the nucleus. You measure the WIMP nucleus cross section, try to see if the standard model nucleus has recoiled. If there is no recoil, no such interaction has happened, and therefore you are shaking the dark matter, the standard model particles, and looking for whether there is an evidence. This is the direct detection experiment. And what I would now next talk to you is in the collider experiment, you produce the pair of dark matter particles and try to detect them in your Large Hadron Collider experiments. There is yet another branch about indirect detection, where the dark matter collision will produce two standard model particles, and that will happen in the galaxies at the center of dwarf stars, etc., where one expects to have centers of galaxies and center of dwarf stars. There one expects to have large dark matter density even at the center of the sun. People expected that you might be able to see such signal for the annihilation of dark matter particles into standard model particles. I will not talk about this here. This is something I've already described to you, and this is the one that we'll try to take next. Actually, dark matter at the LHC is a big hit subject. And this is just to show you, a friend of mine had done it in 2007, just to show you that the number of papers that appear on the archives, which have LHC plus dark matter in its title, have been growing. And nowadays, actually, this is 2017. Nowadays, this is just steeply going on, and you will just see a large number of papers which are dealing with this subject, because that's the subject where the utmost concentration of the effort of the community has been, for reasons that I have tried to put forward to you. So this is again telling you that in the particle physics models, there are indeed many, many models, because as I told you, we have no knowledge, no observational constraint on its mass, and people have actually constructed different types of candidates based on different models, and each of these models actually correspond to a different cross section, which means that only some of these models are going to be able to produce the relic density that has been observed at the Planck experiment. But this is the range of the cross sections that the models predict. This is the range of the masses that the models predict. And now you have to figure out where is the dark matter candidate really sitting in this plane. And more than that, not all the models give signatures at the Large Hadron Collider, but also not all the models are well motivated, like supersymmetry. So as far as I'm concerned, and many other people are concerned, one tries to discuss this in the context of a model called supersymmetry. And I do this in a particular model called phenomenological minimal supersymmetric standard model. And the advantage here is that the prediction for the relic density, which I will remind you again, maybe this picture is enough. The predictions of the relic density go through the relative size of the processes, standard model particles colliding, producing dark matter particles producing standard model particles, and the equilibrium between them is what decides the relic density. So clearly the relic density depends on the strength of the interaction of the relic density particle, and that is the dark matter, and the mass of the dark matter particle. Then the direct detection, which you just now saw, that we have constraints on the direct detection cross section of the dark matter particle with the standard model nucleon and the mass of the dark matter particle. And you will notice here that for the masses which are very small, of the dark matter particle, the recoil energies are extremely small, even less than the keV, and the current dark matter detection experiments are not able to have any sensitivity to the cross section. Even if there was a large cross section, the dark matter detection experiments will not be able to see that. So they simply don't have any sensitivity in the region of low mass of the dark matter candidate. And if I just wanted to say, for example, typically the supersymmetric dark matter candidate predict cross sections somewhere in this region, which is rather close to this exclusion boundary, and we will discuss that. But the same standard model particles interactions and supersymmetric particle interactions will decide the direct detection cross sections. So same parameters which decided relic density, the same ones will decide the direct detection cross sections, and whether or not you can see these particles at the Large Hadron Collider will also be decided by the same parameters. Therefore, we can study that model through its implication for all these three different experiments. We choose the region of the parameter space such that it produces the right relic density, that it is consistent with non-observation in the direct detection, and then you ask the question whether the Large Hadron Collider provides me some measurements that we can make so as to see whether we can probe this region and say conclusively prove that a certain region of the parameter space is simply not realized in nature. So that is the sort of purpose. So how do you produce the dark matter at the colliders? There are different ways. One is that you produced it in the decays of the supersymmetric particles themselves. That is, you produce a supersymmetric partner of the top quark. Within its decay, you will produce the supersymmetric dark matter candidate, which we technically called LSP, the lightest supersymmetric particle. Otherwise, sometimes it can be produced in association with other standard model particles. And one of the examples which I will take is when two protons collide and produce a pair of a Higgs boson and a Z boson, where the Higgs boson actually decays into a pair of dark matter particles. So it produces, the collision produces a Z boson along with a pair of dark matter particle, or you produce a pair of collision of protons, you produce a Higgs with one jet, and the Higgs again produces a pair of dark matter particle. So you produce in the collision a single jet and a pair of dark matter particles. Now, what is special about the dark matter particles? The special thing is, as we just now said, they're neutral. They're neutral, so they will not leave tracks in the detector, because in the detector, particle physics detectors, everything is detected by the tracks it leaves in the detector. If it has no electromagnetic interaction, it cannot be seen in the detector. So the production of this invisible particle is only indicated by imbalance of momentum, and you have to produce events with a momentum imbalance. This is called missing transverse energy. And this is possible when the dark matter particle is light. Now this we have already looked for. The supersymmetric partners themselves have not been produced, and therefore we have not seen them in the cascade decays. So this is the part B, is the one in which people are looking for dark matter particles. And my own personal connection is that as old as something like 2003, we had actually suggested how to look for the dark matter at the colliders through the Higgs portal. And this was a very old paper of mine. And then we looked at more carefully recently how to look for the other manifestations of a light dark matter particle at the collider. And I'm going to give you some idea of both these things. So in the paper in 2003, we basically said that you can produce a Z with a Higgs boson. This is a standard model particle. Now this standard model particle, named the Higgs boson, in the supersymmetric theories, can actually decay into a pair of dark matter particles, but dark matter particles will not leave any track in the detector. So all you would see is a Z boson decaying into a pair of leptons or a pair of jets coming out at, you just see that. This is basically not seen in the detector. So all you see in the detector is a large momentum coming out in terms of the Z boson decay products. And since energy and momentum must always be balanced, then you infer that along with the Z boson, something else was produced, which actually did not leave a track in the detector. This is the standard technique, quote unquote, for looking for dark matter particles. And for example, in this particular case, these people call it looking for a mono Z or a mono W. And this is something which we had suggested quite a long time back. Similarly, you can produce the Higgs boson along with two jets in this process. And again, if this Higgs boson decays into two dark matter particles, all you see in the detector, it's two jets going back to back and a lot of transverse momentum imbalance. And this is how one can then look for it. Now, this was something we had suggested much before the Higgs was actually found. But recently, the Large Hadron Collider, people were able to see the Higgs where PP goes to a Higgs and a Z, where the Z decays into mu plus mu minus, and the Higgs decays into a BB bar. So this is the Higgs decaying into a BB bar. This is the Z decaying into a mu plus mu minus. This was a beautiful event that our CMS people found. Actually, once they saw this, they got more ambitious, and they said, let me look at an event when the Z decays into a pair of neutrinos. Standard model predicts that, and therefore you will not see these decay products. So all you will see is a Higgs decaying into a BB bar. Can you see such an event? And indeed, they were able to see such an event where just the Higgs decayed into a BB bar and the Z decayed into a nu bar. So now actually this shows that they can indeed look for the kind of events which we had proposed they should look for, where the Higgs decays into dark matter particle and Z decays into visible particles. So that is indeed what they are looking for, and unfortunately they haven't found it. So this is really also sometimes if you produce a production of a Higgs with a gluon jet and the Higgs decays invisibly, it will just produce a single jet. And indeed they have seen events like that. There is a single jet, okay, nothing else. Now you will say, okay, then why am not that described and announced that they are able to see such a dark evidence for dark matter? Simple reason is that a standard model can produce similar events. So they have to actually see if they saw any excess over these types of events over the ones that were predicted by the standard model events, and we have not seen any evidence. So in fact, in our 2012 paper, we had said that people will be able to make such measurements and look for a Higgs decaying invisibly if its probability that it will decay into invisible particle is some substantial number. And if it is less than a certain limit, LHC will not be able to look for it. And indeed, we actually said that with the 14 TeV, the current energy of the LHC, with the current luminosity, that a number of events that they have collected, they should be able to see an invisibly decaying Higgs if the branching ratio, that the probability that it will decay into invisible particles is about 17%. And unfortunately, LHC has only said that they looked for it in exactly this channel, but they have not been able to see it. So they have set only a limit, and the limit is more or less the same as what we thought would be seen. So this invisible decay of the Higgs is a thing that they will keep on looking for. And in future runs of LHC, they would be able to probe further and further below in the branching ratio. And they might be able to see it even if it's rarer and rarer. But that's all that right now lies in the future. And as I already said, in each model, the invisible branching ratio, as well as it's related to the total relic density, and therefore by the observations, non-observation of the invisible decay actually rules out some of the values of the parameters of the model. And thus we see here an example. This was again a paper which we wrote in 2015, at which point that it did a direct detection of experiments. The experiments were not so good, and we had only measurements on invisible decay width of the Higgs. And then we had said that in the plane, for example, as a function of the dark matter particle, these blue regions were the regions which we thought should be probed by the direct detection experiments in near future. And indeed, they have done that. And now actually in the same plane, we see that the xenon 1-ton measurement has told that the region where the dark matter mass could be around 45, it's completely ruled out. And the only region that is still left is the place where the dark matter mass is about 60 GeV. This is in a particular version of the supersymmetric extension of the standard model. Then we also ask the question, can one actually study this at the upcoming runs of the Large Hadron Collider? And indeed, we find that the Large Hadron Collider will be looking for this with the region blue points. This current run of the Large Hadron Collider can see this, but the orange points would meet the next generation of the Large Hadron Collider runs. So what I'm trying to show you as the following, I will leave this because this we are running out of time. And I will just tell you that what we see is that the WIM paradigm, which is a light LSP between 10 GeV to 100 GeV, can be completely tested through the fact that it should produce the right relic density. Then it should be searched for at the current LHC or the next run of the LHC, which will happen in a year or two, the E plus E minus future colliders, and the direct detection experiments. Now, the remaining questions, there are many, many questions, and there are many, lots of models, and that can take a completely different talk, and I'm not going to go through that. But all I can say is that the quest for dark matter still continues. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Rohini. I think we have really run out of time, but I think maybe we can just quickly answer one or two questions, or maybe I answer them and then you can add or correct me or add if you wish. There was one interesting question which actually said, if one galaxy has been discovered that is stripped of dark matter, what about that? And I would say, I would say such things happen, and we will, when we have a complete theory, we'll try to account for it.
Actually, I would say that these are also, one has to realize that many of these measurements are statistical in nature. Many of the predictions which are made are also statistical in nature. And among the billions of galaxies, if you find one which is devoid of dark matter, at the present juncture, I don't think this raises an issue. But indeed, this is something that is very much an active area of research in astronomy. I mean, in fact, that's why I mentioned this measurement through the lensing in the Deep Field Survey, where they have found clusters of dark matter, which seem to be, they seem to be larger number of smaller clusters in the galaxy clusters, for example, from measurement of gravitational lensing, than the simulations give you, the galaxy simulations, which assume a dark matter. So all I'm saying is that this is a state of flux. This entire understanding is very much a state of flux.
And there were two questions, one about whether the gravitational field of dark matter would alter the gravitational field of our galaxy, and whether
it does, right?
I mean, black holes.
No, certainly it does. I mean, that's what the whole point is, that that is how we have established the existence of dark matter. So I don't see this changing anything. I mean, there is enough evidence that some matter which has pure gravitational, at least has to have gravitational interaction, its existence is completely beyond, to me, beyond doubt.
Srinivasan Shekhar has an interesting point which you have actually answered. So I just want audience to realize, if DM-DM interaction produces SM, wouldn't we have been able to find SMs created in LHC without apparent explanation that can be observed? Well, not in LHC.
Not in LHC. That is why I talked about the indirect detection experiments in the center of the galaxies. For example, in the center of the galaxies, where there is a dark, or a center of the sun, yes, where there is a galaxy, dark matter, large dark matter density. We imagined actually, and people have some evidence. People have reported signals of dark matter, okay, they have signals of production of E plus E minus pairs and BB bar pairs and mu plus mu minus pairs. Now the problem, however, is that there is a whole lot of, firstly, there is a whole lot of astrophysical foreground in the measurements themselves. And secondly, there are sources, astrophysical sources, for giving rise, which will give rise to that standard model particle production also. So I think there are enough, actually there are quite a few reports of detection of SMSM into dark matter into SMSM production in the indirect detection experiments. And there is a very famous experiment called Fermi-LAT, which is a satellite-based experiment and which makes a lot of very wonderful measurements, in fact. And
looks for DMDM going into SM.
It definitely looks for DMDM going to SMSM. That was the arrow that I said I won't discuss too much.
Right. And then I think maybe the last question we should deal with is somebody is asking whether we are back to square one with having ether around us.
I don't think so. I think we have much more understanding of the situation. And that is where I think, according to me, the cosmology and the formation, the basic, what is this?
Sorry.
Feedback. The basic question that you asked in the beginning of, before I started the second part, how is the dark matter created? Okay, that understanding we have now, that in the early universe, this dark matter was created. And the fact that it was created means that there is indeed interaction which produces these dark matter particles. There is a relic density of dark matter particles, and we have a complete hypothesis for that it should be produced. We understand that.
DM is definitely particulate, that we know from a lot of evidence, but the dark energy is probably...
Dark energy is an entirely different story, and I would
borders on being
open my mouth about it. I don't think...
Borders on being
I will be very honest. I certainly don't understand it. And if anybody says that they understand it, I mean, it's really something, it's an interesting subject. I mean, because it might actually change our ideas about, some ideas about gravitation. I don't know. I mean, but on the other hand, we are seeing black holes, we are taking images of black holes, and we do understand that our understanding of gravity is pretty solid. So I would imagine that there are deeper questions of nature, particularly in the context of dark energy, that we are just going to beginning. I think we are beginning with a stage where we are taking dark energy serious. The establishment of dark energy itself got a Nobel Prize only recently. And the establishment of dark matter itself also got the Nobel Prize recently. So establishment of this phenomena is something that has just happened. And particle physics community, astroparticle physics community, it's just beginning to think of ideas, how one can understand what these two entities are. And right now we can only doing it in the framework of the theories that we have. So but I wouldn't throw in the towel and say that we are back to ether. That I wouldn't say.
So on that note, that there are lots of open questions and all the young people should really have
precisely.
Excitement time.
So there is a lot happening. That is the message that had to go. That there is a lot happening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Sushila.
Sushila, I guess.
Thanks very much. This was very, very fascinating 90 minutes. I think we've had a peep into a world that we really don't understand, but then Human Quest has always looked at, has always picked up questions about things we don't quite understand and said, what is it about and how does it impact us? What are the implications in a broader, whether philosophical or physical sense, because these two aspects go hand in hand all the time. So in this last 1.5 hours, Dr. Rohini Kodbole showed us a peep into what happened at the time of the Big Bang and how matter was formed. Some of that matter, which is less than 5% of the universe, is the matter that we understand. And there's a whole lot of other matter, much, much greater in quantity, that we call today as dark matter. Dark matter was first postulated by astrophysical observations and seen as a relic from the Big Bang that occurred. Particles that we know account for just 5% or less than 5% of matter in the universe. And dark matter must have certain characteristics which we don't today quite know, except to the extent that we know that it is not luminous, and we know that the interactions must be weak interactions, but we do not know much more about it. We also do know for sure that we and our universe would not exist if it were not for dark matter. So that pretty conclusively tells us about the existence of dark matter. So how do we detect dark matter particles? And a large part of Dr. Rohini's work, and which she talked us through today, was about how that is done and where the experiments and their status lies. She told us that only something like the LHC can possibly help us detect such particles. And after the finding of the Higgs boson, which was a lot of excitement, not just within the physics community, but also with the lay public, there are still many unanswered questions. We thought that many of those things we'd find definitive answers, but there are still many questions that we don't know. Questions especially relating to interactions. And one of the cartoons that you showed was about, we've understood what nothingness is about. So that was a very telling kind of a statement. So she also talked about the implications for the future of physics and talked about a physics beyond the standard model that we know. She went on to then talk about the fact that every particle has a supersymmetric partner, and that really is going to be the basis of how we can understand dark matter particles going forward. And then, of course, she dealt in a lot of detail with how can these particles be detected in the LHC itself. So, many unanswered questions, as Urjit mentioned, both in terms of observation and in terms of aesthetic questions. They're all standing technical edge. So, as I said, so Dr. Rohini Godbole told us there are many unanswered questions, and what are the characteristics? So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. Looking far into the universe and deep inside to find answers to these questions. So we are on the threshold of finding some totally new particles and perhaps a new particle physics as well along with that, which we don't have constructs for us for them just as yet. It's only the last decade that 4 Nobels have been awarded that point to the fact that a physics beyond the standard model exists, and there are many mysteries that need to be probed and solved. And for the budding physicists out there, I hope this has been a very inspiring talk that will help you understand and want to work in this space. We need lots of good minds to be applied here. And it's not just about the physicists, it's also about technologists and others in allied areas, because this search for the dark matter is not only about physicists. There are a whole lot of other people who work alongside for us to really understand what all this is about. So with this, I just want to say thank you very much, both to Urjit and to Rohini. This was absolutely wonderful. From the number of questions that we have had, which unfortunately we've not had the time to answer all of them, but you can just see the deep interest there is in your work as well as in the subject. So once again, thank you very much. The webinar is recorded and will be put up on the IIT ACB YouTube channel. Please do look for it there, and please do join us on our next edition. With this, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and bye-bye. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.